Hello, scholars. Welcome to the very first week of our amazing learning journey. I am your instructor, Dr. James Hudson, and you guys are enrolled in Introduction to Communication. We are going to start this week by talking about a few simple rules about communication. So buckle up, let's learn as much as we can. The rules of communication. The first rule of communication is that communication begins with self. This basically means that in order to communicate a message, you have to think with your mind about what is most important to send as a message. Think about the audience. Think about who you are and the image that you want to send of yourself. Think about what is most ideal for the occasion, what's most ideal for the space that you are in, and what would be the most ideal to incorporate understanding for your audience. Remember that the definition of communication is using messages to generate meaning. Your ultimate goal is to generate meaning, a certain level of understanding, and that starts with thinking about who you are, who you're communicating with, and what will be best to make sure that this communication takes place effectively. The second rule of communication is that communication involves others. In most instances, when we are communicating, we're not communicating intrapersonally. We're typically communicating at least with one other individual, which would be interpersonal communication, a relational exchange between two or more individuals. Also, we consider public speaking to be communication, in which case we are disseminating messages to a live audience. We may also elect to communicate to the masses through mass communication by using various mediums to send our messages. In most of these cases, we are sending messages to other individuals. Even when we elect to communicate intrapersonally, we have to acknowledge that the way that we think, the way that we communicate, the language that we use, even in our mind, the rules of that language, the understanding behind that language has been passed on to us from someone else. So we have to understand that in every type of communication, it involves someone else. Communication is inevitable. This means that communication will take place even when we do not intend to send messages. Simply being present in a situation, in a space where another individual has the capacity to interpret our presence, to see our personal appearance, to see our condition, our facial expressions, our posture, our movement, our gestures, all of those are tools for communication. And if someone is able to witness us and decode messages that our presence creates, then that is communication. As such, it's very difficult for us to get away from communicating with people. What we must do is make sure that we are sending the right messages while we are communicating. Communication is irreversible. Once a message has been sent, there is no way to unsend that message. Let's go back to the definition. Using messages to generate meaning. Every time that we send a message, a meaning has been generated in the audience member who has decoded our message. The only thing that we can do is add to that message. We cannot undo what has been done in the mind of our audience member. Communication is also unrepeatable. There is no way for you to generate the exact same meaning over again. So think of this. If I tell you guys that the definition of communication is using messages to generate meaning, you think about that, you process that. Your thought may be, okay, I never thought of it that way, but that's the definition. If I were to repeat that thing again, exactly the same, you might think, oh, that must be important. Let me jot that down. At some point, after continuously repeating the same thing, you may assume that there is something wrong with me, or that I think that something is wrong with you. The last rule is that quantity does not increase quality. I like to think that practice does not make perfect unless practiced perfectly. So we as individuals, we go our entire lives doing things that aren't necessarily done exactly the way we want them to be done, or exactly the way that other people think they should be done, in which case it's not necessarily true that we are practicing perfectly, in which case we may not be getting better at that thing at all. We may just be going through the motions. This is particularly important for communication because we must understand that just because we are speaking to individuals does not mean that they are understanding us every time we send messages. Remember, the whole purpose of communication is to generate meaning. If that meaning is not being generated in an effective manner, in a way that the individual can understand and is consistent with what you anticipated, then you are not effectively communicating.